So we'd really love to start off with you just stating your name and introducing yourself and what you do.
I'm Tom Funke. I created Funke Presents, which is an event production company here in Cincinnati. It's been going since about 2015. Prior to that, I owned a pottery studio in town. And then prior to that, I worked in foreign service. So I moved to this city permanently in 2004 and have done a variety of things since I've been in the town.
Yeah. So 2004, that's a long time.
It is a long time.
You know, a local now. But what?
In some ways, I still can't answer the question, what high school did you go to?
I was literally going to do that next.
Yeah.
I was going to be like, okay, we have a couple of native questions before you state where you're from. And one of them was, what school did you go to, Tom?
So I went to De Smet Jesuit, which is similar to, I think, Moeller here.
I like that you can give the comparison.
And he did.
You know exactly what that
I've
question means.
I feel rehearsed
He
on
said
that.
high school.
It's my 5-minute spiel at a gala. They ask me what
I need to work on mine because Jennings County High School in Southern Indiana, there's not really a comparison.
Yeah, Brad's not a
right?
local.
No,
I'm the
Right.
only
not
one.
local.
This just happened to me the other day. I was at an emerging leaders event and with networking, and there was several people that weren't from here. And when I said, someone's like, "Oh, what school did you go to?" And I said my high school, they looked at me so weird. Well, they were from New York.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought we were
It's different.
Yeah, I thought we were in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
But my other question was a native question, which I didn't even prep this to Brad.
Oh,
but
here we go.
okay, this is going to be, it's just a funny question. So there is a certain candy, because we're in Halloween times, there's a certain candy. It's a peanut butter cup. Okay. Chocolate with peanut butter cup. How do you pronounce that candy, Tom?
I pronounce it Reese's.
Oh, okay. So he's still a Midwesterner.
Okay,
So
I don't know the background on that.
yeah,
That's
so Reese's Pieces is like how like Cincinnatians say it Reese's, but it's Reese's.
Reese's.
I do say, no, it depends on who I'm around. 'Cause I do
Right?
say Reese's sometimes.
Okay, so he's truly now, we can call him. He's
When I was young, I said Reese's,
Cincinnatian.
but I converted
Right?
at some point. I
Everyone
think maybe I
converts.
was shamed for that. I don't know.
It's a weird one, but I had to double check on the commercials. I'm like, oh, I was wrong all my life. Not
Well,
that it's
and my
important.
first experience with Reese's peanut butter cup was not the peanut butter cup. It was the egg shape ones that they had at Easter time.
Yeah.
They somehow taste better.
They do taste better. And then like 10 years ago, they started creating all those shapes for all the other holidays. But that was my first experience with a Reese's. So.
That's our first call when we get a sponsorship. It's going to be Reese's.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh my God. Good idea, Brad. Brought to you by.
Brought to you by, exactly. So I do want to get back to that 2004.
Sure.
Like what brought you here? Especially 2004 in Cincinnati, very different than today.
It was very different. When I first moved here, it was during the race riot issues.
Yeah.
But I wasn't full time here. I still kept my place in Chicago and kind of split my time. But family brought me here. After my father passed away, my mom and younger sister relocated up here. And then a family member took terminally ill and just brought me to the area. I wanted to spend time with her while she was still around. And when I did that, I was on leave from the job that I had in Chicago. And I like to keep busy. So I started doing some other work while I was here. And then I started my first business and then went to my second business and just kind of kept going with it and stayed in Cincinnati.
That's amazing. I find that it's unique story. Everyone has their unique story, but being able to start a business because you're inspired to do so is something that is unique to this city. And I think that's awesome.
I feel like it's easier here. What I find interesting about Cincinnati is that you can, in small ways, make a big difference here compared to a bigger city like Chicago, where there's a lot of noise going around and there's a lot more competition. And I feel like there's kind of this craftsmanship culture in Cincinnati that kind of fosters people with ideas doing different things. And, there are a lot that try and fail, but there are a lot that get the support from the community to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. I had a friend that just opened up on Main Street. It was a basically a beauty salon where she specializes in skincare. And she's just from Columbus. And she said the fact that I can have a space downtown, like at prime spot, is so rare.
Yes.
I feel like the barrier to entry for small businesses in Cincinnati is so much easier.
Yeah.
And I think that is and they really support each other. She was saying that the small business owners, they communicate with each other and they're like, they have each other's back, which is super cool, especially in times like the riots, like back in 2004. For sure. So,
well, and I think if you talk to people that didn't grow up in Cincinnati, they will definitely tell you how much easier it is here.
Yeah.
People in Cincinnati, they kind of grew up with it, so they kind of see it as more difficult than it is. But those transplants that come to the city, they see, how much, simpler it is to do things like that.
Yeah, the question you mentioned, what school did you go to? And it comes from a lot of people who are from Cincinnati don't leave. Like you left, but you came back.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do
rare.
that too.
Well, and they call it the boomerang city.
The boomerang,
That's what they joke about. That's how I ended up back here, that my parents' boomerang was so big that it just sucked us all back.
Yeah.
That and growing up outside of Cincinnati with Geta. That was always a strange conversation in St. Louis. They're like, I'm not eating that just for the sheer sound of the name.
I love Geta. Yeah. I love Geta. And now the Coney's took me a while, or the chili. I always go Coney's more than spaghetti, but I do love Coney's now. I didn't when I first moved here.
Yeah.
It took some time.
Yeah.
Speaking of Coney's, when Brad first came to me, he had the most hilarious name for the podcast. And I honestly am obsessed with it, but it was Between the Two Coney's. And we were so excited. We're like, we're going to have everyone taste test. And like, it was a fun little segment that we thought about. But speaking of this, Tom, because my first, when I date people, I ask, like, it's a test. Like if you like Skyline or hate it, what do you like, Skyline?
I like it for what it is.
Question.
Okay.
I don't call it chili. I call it Skyline.
Chili. It's a sauce.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I lived for a summer in Greece, and it reminded me of the sauce that they put in a dish called pasticho, like the cinnamon and some of the different spices that were in it. So I started to kind of think of it not as chili, because I grew up with very Tex-Mex chili that just had a different,
Yeah, that's why if you prep someone for it, like, hey, this is not hearty chili, this is a sauce. It helps.
Right.
And they're from Greece, so that makes sense. But speaking of your pottery, you said it was a studio that you had. What neighborhood was that in?
Yeah.
It was in Oakley. It was called Funky Arts. And before that, it was called Annie's Mud Pie Shop. And I bought that and converted it. And now, today, I sold it a number of years ago, and it became Queen City Clay. That still goes on today. So, yeah.
I love Queen City Clay.
Yeah.
I go there all the time for this is just a fun thing for like families to do and couples to do. I go there all the time. They do offer classes.
Yeah.
It's really cute.
Sing Spin Pottery.
That is really cool, Tom.
Ran my academic program at Funky Fired Arts, took it over and turned it into Queen City Clay.
Did you find that inspiration here? Like, were you already doing pottery before here? Or?
I was already doing ceramics before, so I'm what they call a hybrid. I do sculpture and wheel throwing.
Yeah.
I was doing that in Chicago, and when I came here, in that short time when I was really spending a lot of time with my family, I just needed an outlet. So I went there just to work out of the studio and doing my own work. And then the owner came up to me and said, hey, then I started teaching classes. And then the owner came up and said, hey, I am looking to sell or close the business. Would you be interested? And I thought about it overnight and then went back to her and said, yes, I'm interested. And so we took it from a studio that did some classes and sold some supplies and added a few different divisions. So we greatly expanded the classes, and then we added 2 art galleries, and then expanded our offerings of supplies and things like that, and kind of the role of doing things in the community.
Yeah.
And so I did that for almost 7 years. And then things just have a natural evolution. I loved it, but I felt like my time there was not over, but it was just time for someone else to kind of pick up the mantle and run with it. And so I was very happy that a group of people were interested, and it was just a natural evolution. And now Queen City Clay is doing better than Funkified Arts did. And that makes me proud just to be part of that. But I really give kudos to them for taking it and running with it and adding their own spin to it. And I just hope, I like when that kind of cult of personality doesn't destroy something, and you let people just take it and let it naturally evolve.
That is such a cool story. I love the origin, because I'm like, oh, I know that. That's the funny thing about Cincinnati is, like, they say Kevin Bacon has 7 degrees of separation. In Cincinnati there's about 2. I mean, it's like
100%.
And even when you're not from here but you've been here long enough, I mean, the connections are pretty wild. Speaking of Oakley, so what is one of your favorite neighborhoods in the city, and why? This might be a tough question because there's a lot of little
There are a lot of great pockets that I love. I do have to say Over the Rhine is one of my favorites for multiple reasons. It's the architecture, the fact that, that neighborhood, it's I think one of the largest neighborhoods in the United States that's historically preserved.
Yeah, that's correct.
Or protected. Mm-hmm. I love walking culture. And for me, what was interesting, after I lived in Oakley, I moved to Northern Kentucky to help out with another family member that wasn't doing so well. And then after we got her through her treatments, I was kind of faced with the decision: do I stay in Cincinnati, or do I maybe move back to Chicago or DC? And a friend of mine was looking to rent the second room in his apartment right on Washington Park. And I said, what I miss most is walking culture. And so I gave it a shot. And then I've been in Over the Rhine now since 2016. And I love the neighborhood. I love how it's evolving. I think we overlook the fact that it's being done in a conscious way more so than other cities. Yes, there's always discrepancies. Evolution always leaves some people behind, but we're not leaving as many people behind as some of the urban redevelopment and some of the other metro areas in the United States. And I think we have to be proud of that fact. There are protections in place for different groups of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned walking culture. Off Washington Park, there's now a grocery store just north of there or south of there. How many times do you have to get in a car? I mean, are you walking everywhere, or?
I'm walking everywhere. Unless I'm doing big grocery shopping and I don't want to carry that like ginormous toilet paper roll thing with me. Although sometimes it's fun if you wear it like a hat. I feel like I'm back in Africa where everything's carried in a sack on your head or on your hips. But no, I walk almost everywhere. That grocery store, they talk about Cincinnati being a food desert, which is really strange, having the largest grocery chain almost in the world based here. But as soon as that opened up, that just changed so much. We did have Crogetto on Vine Street.
I remember those days because I went to University of Cincinnati.
And it was
stay away.
It was fine, but like you just didn't know what you were going to find from one day to the next when you went there,
right? Not fresh produce, typically.
Not fresh produce, or they had guests on it when you took it home.
So, as far as you've highlighted this a little bit so far, but what do you think ultimately makes Cincinnati different from other cities, especially like Chicago, because it's still a Midwest city and obviously it's bigger, but what do you think as far as the major differences between places you've lived or just places you've visited?
There's a lot. I feel like hometown pride is really strong here. Mm-hmm. I think you can say that about a lot of places, but people are defensively protective about Cincinnati and its identity. I think that's unique. I think the fact that for a city of its size, the way that it values the arts I mean, we have one of the top ballet companies in town, or in the United States, symphonies, operas, the theater companies that we have, the amount of small local theaters, the ability for artists to be able to make livable wages in a city this size is really rather interesting. And the other point of difference too is I think for a city of its size, there's so much going on. There's so many festivals. There's so many openings and happenings. And the city, a lot of the programming is geared to make it as accessible to people as possible. It doesn't have that air of snobbery around a lot of it. Some of it still does, but I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Just even last summer, I was walking my dog and I came across the Cincinnati Ballet. It was in the park, just free. And we sat down and I was amazed by they were just promoting, the arts here, and then you have the Shakespeare theater, and then the fact that we have access to Broadway plays is incredible. And then when you have like UC's excellent College of Business, CCM, I feel like that attracts a lot too. But you're completely right, and I'm loving the artwork now. Like all the street art is so
absolutely
fun, and with the walkability, you're like, it makes it even better. Like
for sure, and it feels representative of the community too. They've made conscious efforts. You have to applaud artworks for selecting the right artist, the right subject matter, and they've taken critique and criticism well, and they've made that adjustment, which I think is just a great symbolism of how woke our arts are in Cincinnati. We still have the needle still has to be pushed further.
Sure, but
we've come a long way.
Yeah, I think there's a culture of avoiding gatekeeping different identities of the city, but also the arts. The fact that art can't be more approachable than a mural on the street. It's for everyone. It's not just for the people who can afford to pay for the museum entry fee.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and speaking of like growth and events, I think Blink, like that is such an incredible thing that we never had. Like when you first moved here, the difference between the events and the highlights of the culture here from 2004, even 2016 until now, it's incredible. I like just going to Blink and seeing just the crowds walking through the city, and the fact that it was safe. And there was families, there was little kids running around at 10 p.m. at night all throughout the city. Yeah. I think moments like that highlight these murals and the artwork is incredible. And speaking of that, as far as I kind of want to get into some of your events that you hold. Yeah. So we'll start off with like how I know you've talked about the evolution of getting out of pottery, but how did Funke Productions start?
So it kind of started when I worked for the Quebec delegation in Chicago in Foreign Service. I worked with the cultural affairs attaché, and one of the reasons they recruited me was at the university I went to. I went to Loyola University in Chicago. I worked a lot with speaker series and concert series that came on a collegiate level, and that really attracted the cultural affairs attaché for the Quebec delegation when we were being recruited. And so I worked with that group and did a number of things from trade shows to I feel like I'm being redundant saying cultural, but just exhibition type things. And then when I moved to Cincinnati, when I had the pottery studio and then I had the art gallery, every time I did an art gallery opening, I'd have a performing arts troupe or something like that participate to try to make it a multi-sensory experience. And then when I sold that, a really good friend of mine, Pam Kravitz, was doing a series for the Carnegie Museum in Northern Kentucky called The Art of Food. And she said, we could really use your weird brain. And I'm like, are you sure about that? And she's like, absolutely. And so I started working with her and that troupe, which became known as the Polyester Spy Club. And we started doing a number of events. And then I started kind of doing more events on my own. And then then it sort of materialized from there. It's funny, I can't remember my first event as Funke Presents because it just snowballed after that. I was doing gallery openings and things for museums and business launches and some like product line launches for some of the larger companies.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
That is so cool. I didn't realize the like broadband of the different event types, because that was one of my next question is what type of events do you produce? But that is such a wide spread coverage of events, especially product launches.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, some of those, because it looks like those some of those cheesy movies where you've got these hype people that come out and there's, you know, the pow-pows behind them and the streamers coming up and they're like, let's get hyped for the new Swiffer. And you're like, okay, cool. But it's a thing. And so it was kind of interesting. I helped out with another person that was doing them. And then I ended up doing a few of them. I can't say which ones. I'm contractually obligated not to be able to say which projects, but it was just really fascinating the way that they'd come out and hype something like paper towels. And you're like, awesome.
I knew you were not going to tell us who that was. I'm like, hint, hint, PG. Like, yeah.
We might have to edit that out. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll find out when we start making calls. So what can someone expect if they're looking for an awesome night out? And when I see a post online about Funke Productions, what am I walking into?
So I really like for people from the minute they walk in the door to the minute they leave, there's something new that they're seeing. So I like the multi-sensory experience. So I go as far as like, I scent the space, the lighting is essential, the performing artist who greets you at the door, how they greet you at the door, the curation of the food and the cocktails. A lot of what I do now is more party focused. So I just came off of Halloween weekend and I did the event at Somerset, which was called Samhain, which the inspiration for that was The Wicker Man and Somerset, and then Midsummer. And then I did the same night the Dollhouse at Alice, and so that had inspiration from American Horror Stories and a few different other things. But yeah, when you walk in, the way the music's curated, the evolution through the experience, I want people to have a good time from the minute they come in. We know, I also love metrics. So I love looking at, after an event, what did people consume food-wise or beverage-wise? When did they leave? How did they leave? Because we know there's some interesting metrics that people typically stay about 2 hours at a place, and then they're kind of ready for another experience. Cincinnati's a hop-around city. No one wants to commit. That's the one thing about Cincinnati. No one wants to commit until last minute.
That's very true.
I'm
always guilty of that.
Yeah, they're always like, okay, is there something else that's going to come up? Do I really want to do that?
The opportunity cost of committing to the wrong thing 100%. Is pretty high.
100%. And you don't want to be judged.
No.
Which makes no sense because there's no traffic in Cincinnati and everywhere is 15 minutes away.
Exactly.
So the fact that you can't commit is...
Exactly.
But that is actually why. Because when you're in LA or some of these other cities, like you have to pick one.
You have to pick one.
Yeah, you can't really just travel like, oh, I'm going to go here. No, you're not. You're going to go to one place and one place only.
Right.
Or you do the two and then you make a party in the car between the two.
There you go.
I love it. So speaking of those two recent events, which sound incredible, and I was supposed to be at Alice, and now I'm really sad that I missed it. Now I'm going to be like interrogating my friends, like, what did it smell like? What did it sound like? I love.
I might need you to stage some open houses, actually, based on what you just said with the whole sensory experience, and then data too. You're not just doing it by feel.
Yeah, the metrics is impressive. Like I am so shocked by that. I wouldn't have even thought about really dialing in on the consumption and the time they leave. I think that's awesome. Yeah. You'd have to give them some of your commission though, Brad.
Obviously. It'd be worth it though.
Well, it's fun. Some of the metrics, because I love that just from my data analysis when I worked in political science and things like that. It's just fascinating because it also helps. I hate when you get to a bar and you have to wait forever to get a drink. Mm-hmm. So being able to know what that customer, because it's different for different ones, being able to know what they're going to drink and have that ready as a feature moves people through fast, because I know about tolerance level for waiting in line for a drink, what that is. And then people get sick and tired, and then they're like, peace out.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down the street.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's funny you say that about staging for open houses. I used to do that for one of my cousins. I'd go in and I'd bring different things. So you'd open up the door and you'd be wafted with like the scent of lavender and
fresh baked cookies.
Exactly. Exactly.
That being said, so what do you think is the most memorable event, either of this year, or I mean, you've had a lot of events, so that's a really hard question.
It is a hard question. I would say this year I did an event. It was a co-production with Queen Bee Cabaret. I do a burlesque series, and we did Bloodlust, a royally wicked affair. And it was a burlesque series that we did, or a burlesque show that we did at the Mock Bee. And then we had a dance party after it on 2 different floors. We had 2 different styles of music. And I really enjoyed that because it was storytelling from the invitation. Like the promotions were an invitation, and it was an evolution to it. And as you kind of signed on to the experience, you got the next level, so you knew how to come into the space. And the cast of characters just told the story as you walked in. And one of the things we tried to show was this female archetype that doesn't get talked about a lot. The first female vampire was based off of the Countess Bathory, Elizabeth Bathory. We all know Vlad the Impaler, Count. I was almost said Count Chocula.
I was about to finish your sentence with that. I was like, is it Count Chocula?
Count Chocula.
But Count Dracula. But we don't hear about Elizabeth Bathory, but she shows up in a lot of horror films indirectly. She used to drain the blood of virgins in her kingdom and consume some of it and bathe in it, believing that preserved her youth and beauty. And so we just kind of played that up with this kind of blood countess character that we had. And then her royal court was the show. And then after that, the royal court and we were in the catacombs at the Mock Bee. It fits perfectly for that. So
if it were only that easy.
Okay, this is incredible, because I saw her at a bar after the event, and she had this like amazing costume on with the hair, and from afar everyone was like, who is that? It was the most elaborate costume I've ever seen. This is such a small world. This is what I'm talking about.
We did that during Blink. We walked around during Blink.
Oh.
So I saw her down on the West End at Knox Joseph Distillery, and she was up at the bar, and I went up to her, and she was telling me, she did not go into detail of where she just came from, but this outfit was the most elaborate. I'm like, you would win every costume contest, but the detail, like, oh my gosh.
Sure. That was a full period recreation, down to like the 3 levels of undergarments that go under it. I was like, oh my gosh, like what women had to go through during that period just to be able to, the court women, just to be able to pop out. But I was there with her, just kind of unassuming on the side. I said, I felt like one of those handlers at Disney World with like a character, because every time we walked somewhere, I was taking the photos. Like, can you take photos of us with her? And all the little kids thought she was a princess and a queen. And she's like, little do they know this is all coming off in the show. But it was really funny. Yeah, it was funny.
That would be crazy to see, because it was like, I mean, real corset, huge like gown, like, and I don't know what those are, like what the actual costume is called, like the proper term.
The hip pieces, panniers.
Okay.
Yeah, so they kind of stick out wide to the side, and then she had the full wig and everything.
Like
this is amazing. I mean, we started this podcast. We had this idea of a podcast to like present Cincinnati and what we love about it, and already we're on interview 1, and I'm like, there's so much out there that I know nothing about. I haven't been to a Funke Productions event yet, but I can guarantee you that I will, and I'm sure people listening to this will too. This is amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah. How many hours are you putting into these events?
Oh, it's crazy. That one we did a lot because we brought 2 burlesque performers in from New York. And then we had like 11 acts over the course of the show.
Wow.
And then we had our atmospheric performers. So as you came in, everybody that worked on the production was part of it. So we started planning that in July. And just like the Halloween events at Somerset and Alice, I started planning them in July as well. New Year's, started planning that in August. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. You have to think seasons ahead.
Yeah.
The fact that you can plan all those at the same time too, I'm like,
it's a
can't
challenge.
imagine.
It's a challenge. COVID really hurt the event industry.
Mhm.
And so a lot of it I've been doing myself until kind of events got back up with a regular pace. And now I've been adding staff back in to be able to help with some of that. But
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is your staff size?
it's me, and then I have 2 main assistants, and then depending on the event, I bring in other people. Yeah.
And so that leads to my other question. Like, a lot of these events require an enormous amount of collaboration with sponsors and artists and like community leaders. So how do you approach that collaboration? Obviously, you have a very good reputation here, but what are some, tips or tricks that you use to gather these people for one event?
It's picking the right audience. I know my burlesque events, I can't go to some of my clients that are a little more suburban. It might be a little too edgy for them.
Yeah.
So, that's part of it. But then I love to showcase other artists in town, other artists, other creatives, other small businesses. So I think of myself as a curator in many ways. So some of the artists that were performing for this, some of them have their own companies. The graphic designer, the filmographer, right? Videographer, who did the promo videos is starting his own company. And then some of the kind of community leaders that want to showcase, especially like POC performers and things like that, being able to work with them. And then I go to the corporations and I say, this is what we're doing. Here's our target audience. Are you interested? Especially when I get into things like Pride, when I do a lot of the Pride events, I go that way to make sure that it's properly curated with who's trying to represent what at them.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue too into my next question. How do you view your work in the larger LGBTQ community here in Cincinnati?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's still a homophobic city. Unfortunately, in some regards, in other regards, it's not. It's very evolved, but in the greater metro area, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And it's funny, given that we have landmark Supreme Court cases that started here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But we still have that issue. You'll see that in Over the Rhine on an average Friday or Saturday night, homophobic slurs and things like that shouted out from the streets. But you have, at that same time, you have people around that shout back, allies that shout back. So those voices are becoming louder. I do see myself as an activist in the community. During Pride, I do a happy hour that hops around in OTR downtown, a little bit in Clifton. And the original intent was to showcase safe spaces that weren't necessarily LGBTQ designated spaces. And then a portion of all of the consumables, drinks and food would go to a local charity organization with boots on the ground in Cincinnati. This year we spotlit Transform, which is a really interesting organization that helps with the trans community with kind of all stages of it, whether you're considering a transition, you're going through it, but it helps their families, like Health and Human Services. So that's who we spotlighted. This year.
That's such a cool, I haven't heard of that foundation, but that sounds incredible.
The thing that I find the most challenging sometimes, since I do a lot of the events, I do the Pride After Party, I do a number of other events. is getting pigeonholed. Sometimes I get pigeonholed into being an LGBTQ event producer when that's really about 10% of what I do.
Yeah.
And I wear that with pride, knock on wood, sometimes, but it's also an obstacle. It's still a little bit of an obstacle, especially coming out of Pride Month. People expect, all of my things to be that way, and they're not. Most of them are not.
Yeah, especially when you're having events for paper towels. That's completely
exactly.
That showcases your ability right there. So I guess we can go back into Cincinnati, and like, speaking of misconceptions and judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that you said this earlier, that people that are from Cincinnati and it's their hometown, there is a very like defensive attitude to back it up. And I was telling Brad this story, like when I moved to LA, I remember I was on this rooftop bar in downtown LA, super swanky. There was like a pool in this bar. I mean, and being from the West, I'm like, oh my gosh, where am I? But I remember when I said to someone, I was like, oh, I'm from Cincinnati. They're like, oh, you're from the cornfields? And I'm like,
it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
So what do you think?
And what is it about? Isn't Ohio like the 4th or 5th most populous state? We have all these metro areas, and all anybody thinks about is flat cornfields. Right. It's crazy.
It is very bizarre.
It's a branding problem for sure.
It is a branding problem.
You might be able to help us with that.
Yeah, right? I know.
We'll see.
All right, hear that, AFTAB?
Make our city smell better, Tom.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just start spritzing lavender into the air. Just calm everyone down. So what do you think is the biggest misconception of the city? I know there's a lot, but what do you think would be like the number one if you could choose? And this is another hard question, but...
there's an expression that Cincinnati's 10 years behind the time. And maybe in some ways it is, but in other ways it's not. I mean, it's very progressive with its urban development right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's happening faster here than other cities. It's happening faster here than Brooklyn, which is getting exponentially more, finances allocated to it. Mm-hmm. So that's a big misconception. Another misconception, people do say it's friendly, but they also say it's cold.
Yeah.
I felt when I first moved here, Cincinnatians greet strangers with a little bit of suspicion. Like, who are you? What are you? What are you trying to do? And I don't think that's wrong, but then they do welcome you. So I do think that's a misconception as well. I also think people think Cincinnati is just it's just one of those forgettable towns. But then when they come here, they're shocked and surprised by it. I met a woman yesterday at Taft Ale House. I popped over there for lunch. I was using toothpicks to hold my eyes open from the weekend. It was crazy. And she was in from Denver, and she said, I had $200. I wanted to see where I could fly, and she spent $135 to fly from Denver to Cincinnati. She wanted to go see Fritz at the zoo and Fiona. And then she was talking with a few other people that were kind of neighborhood folks about what there is to do in Cincinnati. And she changed her return flight ticket while she was sitting there eating some tots and drinking a flight of Taft's beer. And she added going to Taft Museum, the Contemporary Art Center with the first Zaha Hadid building in the United States. She was then going to go to see the Painted Lady District of homes in Columbia Tusculum, and just all these other things. And she's surprised by that. And I think that's interesting. I think we convert people as soon as they come, because there is a lot to do, and you can do it affordably, and you can hit a number of things in one day. Kind of like what you were touching on earlier. LA, you want to go to the Getty Museum, that's all you're doing that day.
Yeah.
If you make it there.
If you don't even get me started on that. Topanga Canyon was like my that was the hole that I never got out of while I was there. But yeah, I think that's part of it. She hit 3 different museums in one day, and she tried out a number of different restaurants. That's something too. we have a culinary scene unlike so many. Just the diversity of food and the quality of food and the quality of ingredients. The fact that maybe we do live near cornfields, we have such great sources for local produce, and it's incredible.
And you don't have to put on a 3-piece suit to go to those places. You can dress like I am today and go to the best restaurants in the city.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And
you can
don't
be
need
as basic as you are right now and have a great experience.
I've been called worse.
Basic bread. Basic bread. Tom just gave you a hashtag, basic bread.
Wow, I don't know.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm going to need a rebranding.
We'll work on that too.
Thank you.
We'll scent it.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm thinking sandalwood and bergamot, maybe.
Okay.
Ooh,
all right.
I love that.
Sounds natural.
It's weird. I wear men's cologne now because I love that woody scent.
Yeah.
And everyone is men are like, they're like, what are you wearing? I'm like, oh, cologne.
Right.
But I'll claim the lavender. I like that.
There you go.
It's also cool because you don't need reservations here. It's not like you have to plan your events like months in advance. The accessibility of the city is so incredible. And I do, speaking of the variety, like, is it Lalo or Lalo? Where it's
Lalo.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that it was two cultures combined. The wife she is Asian and the husband is Mexican, and they fused it together so beautifully.
Fusion culture. I kind of feel like that's a word that needs to be branded in this city is
right?
Fusion culture. And we still have, again, the needle still has to be pushed further. There are underrepresented groups, but even looking at kind of the soul food movement in Cincinnati, we have got great restaurants that just opened up. But Asian restaurants, we still have a way to go with some of those.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some great ones, but
I find that a lot of the best Asian restaurants are actually outside of the inner core city.
they are.
They're
That's
in
exactly
different
it.
suburban areas.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I think you also made a good point earlier. The fact that the metro area is so advanced and like culturally woke compared to the suburbs. I mean, that is the sad thing about this, the discrepancy between like OTR versus, Milford or Lebanon.
Oh, for sure. And the
further you get.
The fear that the suburbs still have about the urban core. They still have a fear of coming down. And yeah, there have been some incidences in Over the Rhine lately, but they also match national statistics right now. It's unfortunate. I like the fact that it's creating the outrage that it is, because that's going to help us improve those situations. One thing I think we can do to improve just as a society in general is once kids get out of that childlike state from like about 12 years old to about 18, there is not much for them to do anymore. I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I was a kid, you could go to the mall or something like that. There were places that you could go and hang out and have a good time. Those don't really exist much anymore. They're saturated with so much more than we were. I think that's an interesting thing we could develop in Cincinnati is how do we entertain, that group of citizens to be better citizens.
That's a really good idea, because I know when we were growing up, we would hide from our parents at the mall, the movie theater, and they would have those. I know you're not from here, but they would have these like.
I didn't have mall or movie theater in my county. I had to leave the county to do anything. Oh my gosh! So I was just riding my bike. That's all.
Playing outside, and the fact that we didn't have like cell phones glued to our fingers, I feel like getting out into nature. That's something that I did 100%. As a kid.
We played in the creek behind our house.
Yeah.
And now I think the wokeness has also brought a fear to that. You don't want to let your kids out running around. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't want to let them go play in the creek. You don't know what's spilled there. So we have to think about what that looks like for our kids.
Do you see a future in which Funke Productions is producing these events for a younger crowd? That's
100%.
Very different.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things I really prided myself on when I owned the pottery studio was working with a group of people that worked with me to create children's programs all throughout the year. I would love to do that. I'm working with someone from ISH, the Jewish organization in town, Jewish cultural organization in town, about creating an environment where, what do you call it? It evolves during the night. So there's a period of time when it's open to the younger crowd, but then the content evolves. So the space stays the same, but the content evolves over the course of the night to become more grown up.
That's a cool concept. Amazing. Like after 10, it's like, all right, kiddos, but they got to enjoy. That's what was so cool about Blink is that I was shocked. I called my friend and I'm like, are kids allowed? You know, I was hanging out with my friend's children that were, it was 12, like the age range that people enjoyed. It was like a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 12-year-old. I mean, all the age ranges for events like that. And then later at night, you know, they can go. That's a really cool idea. I love that idea.
And that event went off. You'd mentioned earlier, it was a safe event. It was there for everyone. I think that's like, there's something to take from that once you have these approachable, community-oriented things, you take away some of the friction that people have.
For sure.
And the fear. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
What's, how do you see the city evolving in the next 5 or 10 years? And I actually kind of want to make that a 2-part question. How do you see it evolving, and how do you hope it evolves?
I hope that it continues to evolve to not leave people behind, especially our African-American community, our the kind of Latinx diaspora that is settled in Cincinnati. I want to make sure that everybody's included in the narrative and that we don't whitewash the story. I think that's really important. I think we're doing better than some cities, but we have a lot of improvement that we can do. And also to just, you know, for the LGBTQ community to make sure that we continue, as we're seeing some of these court cases with Roe v. Wade, and they're talking about, they're coming after the cases that permitted same-sex marriage.
Obergefell.
Mm-hmm.
I always pronounce it wrong.
The Obergefell and the Windsor cases. We just need to make sure that we don't leave people behind as we do that. What was the other part of your question? How do you see it evolving? And I think you answered how you hope to see it evolve. So I hope to see that we bring more people back down to living in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Different groups of people. That really helps keep it dynamic. What killed our cities was everybody moving to the suburbs.
Yeah.
And so seeing people move down, like where I live up by Washington Park, you know, you have a mix of incomes. You have empty nesters that moved from the suburbs down. And then you have, you know, families starting out. I would say I'd like to see it continue to have affordable options. OTR is one of the most expensive neighborhoods now to live in. And this renaissance was started by urban artists, Black, white, and brown, who banded together to kind of promote the performing arts scene, the bar culture, the visual art culture. And now a lot of them are priced out of the market, so they can't even live down there.
Yeah.
A big problem there is some of the zoning, that it's not legal to build a multi-family place in most of the city. And I think if we have more urban policies rather than the suburban policies that
100%
took place decades ago, that can help.
We're definitely going to need, this is like a huge political battle.
It is.
Especially with the tax rate. So as a lender, I'm licensed in all 50 states, and I look at tax rates all across the country. And it's a huge, everyone's like, oh, California is so expensive. It's like, their tax rate is 1.75.
Right.
Do you know what ours is in the city? 2.23. I'm pretty sure. And the base of our tax rate in Cincinnati is 1.75. But then they charge us for all of, you know, I get it, the schools and everything, but they need to find a way to make it more affordable. Yes, we have a lower population, but something has to be done, because what made the OTR so great were all of those people that are now getting pushed out to the suburbs where they don't belong.
Right.
Yeah. One of my questions was, you mentioned before we got on the show, you had experience with NPR, and was it Patty that you, or Patty, right?
Yeah.
What did you do on NPR? I love that.
I just got on a few times.
I'm actually jealous.
I know. I'm really jealous.
Also,
I'm like, oh.
Also, Amy Tobin.
Okay.
So it was just getting on and talking about what was going on in the city, to some promotional things, just some conversations. The first one I went on, I was just absolutely terrified. I think they assumed I was a pro, and I walked in and all the equipment I had to put on and all of that. They thought I could like mic myself up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And then
fund NPR.
Yeah.
Please.
But it was fun. I enjoyed it. That was quite some time ago, but yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, speaking of which, because Brad and I were mentioning this before the show, we're like, we really wanted to go to a Funky production event. Where is somewhere where guests can look to see like upcoming events?
Sure.
Ones that are obviously not private events. Where is the best place to get your information out there?
I would say follow me on Instagram at Funke Presents. I do also have a website, funkepresents.com. I've got a number of series that are starting, which I'm excited about. I have a burlesque series called the Sapphire Lounge that's starting at Summer House, which is the event space by Somerset. It's on Republic.
Yeah, I've been there once.
I haven't been there.
It's kind of a different experience. And then at Alice, I'm taking over the last weekend of the month, and we're bringing in go-go dancers and just kind of...
That's ongoing every month?
It's going to be ongoing, yeah.
Very
this
cool.
was kind of a debut of that. When I did their grand opening, I had dancers, and they said, we love the hype. It started people dancing 2 hours first, because 2 hours earlier, because who wants to be that first person on the dance floor?
Cincinnati.
I mean, I do if I have the right liquid courage sometimes, but
it's easier to be the first person if you know that there's a second person that's going to follow. Like you need a community there.
I was just down in Covington, and there was some out of towners like, where do we go to dance? And I mentioned Alice, but it's so I really am so glad that you're bringing this to our city, because it's a huge thing that people complain about, is that there's really like not as many places to dance as some of the other larger cities.
And also too, some places kind of give you mixed messages.
Yeah.
You'll go one Saturday and it's the dance party of the year. And then you go the next Saturday and it's ambient, everybody hanging around, twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah.
And so the message is clear. Come and dance, be part of the dance. And we're actually going to we thought about this over the weekend. We're going to do an open call for go-go dancers. And people have this idea, they think of go-go dancers as strippers, and they're not. They're the party starters.
Yeah.
Back in the day, we used to call them the fluffers. But in other industries, that has a very different...
Think that got taken over.
Yeah, that got taken over. But they kind of fluffed up the night.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have kind of an open call for it. We're going to give you 5 minutes to hop up on a go-go platform. You pick the song and just strut your stuff. And if we like you, we're gonna ask you back to come dance. So
don't look at me. I'm not doing it, no.
Maybe we do round 2, and I'll sit on the other side of the mic, and you guys strut your stuff up on the go-go platform.
I was just gonna say, Brad, I'll be able to film that. That is such a cool idea. I think the series is amazing, because just like us, like, oh man, we missed that event. Well, now the word gets out,
and it's going to be on the same time every month, so you can kind of get it in your head. Same with the burlesque series; it's going to be the same time every month, so you can kind of think about that.
When is that launching?
So the first of the burlesque series is, I think it's the 17th of November. It's that Thursday.
Okay, so yeah.
I'm so excited because some of my friends were talking about burlesque at Ghost Baby, and I know it was such a random time. It was very hard you had to get reservations, and it was hard to plan. So the fact that this is scheduled, like we can throw it on our calendars.
I think one of our future guests has role in burlesque. Brandon Reynolds, I think, does burlesque as
Brandon Reynolds is the partner of Madame Mira, her stage name, of Queen Bee Cabaret. So he is a beekeeper and he burlesque. He was the RMC at Bloodlust.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's fantastic. And then he was my hype man. He did the costume contest at Alice this last weekend, where Dobby from Harry Potter days won, and we had a female Dobby, because I'm not gonna misgender someone, did some really fascinating things with that sock, that gifted sock that won her the speaker tower.
That's so cool. I love it. This is like, see what I'm saying with Cincinnati? It's 1 degree. Like
it is.
That wasn't even 2. That was direct.
That was one of my like first things I noticed going into real estate. I thought going into real estate, like I don't really have this large network, but I started talking to the network that I have and realize that it opens up very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it does. And the cultural creatives, as they're called, which is it is a political science movement. They're the ones they're the building blocks of the city. And in a city like Cincinnati, the small approachable size allows people to kind of find each other more. And they're challenging the old gatekeepers, which is really fascinating right now. You still have gatekeepers in the city with like the big arts organizations. We can't vilify them. Some of them worked really hard to get to those positions, but we all get stuck in our ways, and all these others that are coming up. It's really exciting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like instead of if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. That's New York. If you can make it here, you can take it anywhere. Like
100%.
It's like I don't know, like
like that.
Look at the exporting of brands that we've done, just even in the restaurant culture. You're finding our restaurants now in Columbus and Indianapolis.
Yeah,
and
like
things
the same
like that.
strip in OTR has been so successful. I remember I went to Indianapolis. I'm like, wait, am I in OTR? Like, what
100%,
what is going on?
100%.
Which is so cool that they can grow.
With my background in Indiana, I talked to friends that are in Indy, and they wanted to tell me about the cool restaurants, and it was the Eagle and Bakersfield and all these places that have been here for so long. Like, cool guys.
Exactly.
I love Indy. I don't want the don't at me with the anti.
Oh no, that wasn't anti-Indy, but it just goes to show you what's actually happening here and how it's applicable to so many people, because I don't know, the tastes of Cincinnatians are very, very palatable. I mean, yes, Cincinnati Skyline chili, it has a question for some people, but a lot of our tastes are very palatable for, a lot of the people in the U.S. in general.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If we could narrow down, like one word for Cincinnati that you could pinpoint, we're going to ask all the guests this, as far as like what lights you up about the city. This might be hard. It can be like a sentence or a word, as far as why you love Cincinnati or that kind of theme, just so we can carry it on with other guests. Might be a hard question.
Catalytic.
Oh, he did it. Yeah. Yay.
I love that.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Man, you just mic drop, Tom. I love it.
What drives that for you? I mean, what takes you to Catalytic?
People talk about ideas and then they do them.
Yeah.
And they might have to fight a little bit to make it happen. It's not easy. I'm making it sound like some of the stuff is easy. It's not easy. The struggle and the hustle are real, but they talk about it and then they do it. And then the city, more so than a lot of other cities, helps to make that happen. That
civic pride definitely makes you want to root for the people that are doing cool things here.
But, some of our civic leaders understood the fact that if we didn't organically develop, our city was just going to continue to degrade.
Yeah.
And now we're on an upturn because it's that craftsman culture that built this city, the immigrants, the freed slaves that we just don't talk about enough here that really helped build the city that we live in now. It was all built on craftsman culture. Everybody came with an idea and a skill, and then they kind of organized it in a way that built a really dynamic city. And now I think we lost that for a minute. And I think that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah. Love it.
That's perfect.
Making it happen.
Absolutely.
Cool.